Welcome to The Plunge, a Cryo-EM podcast from Mimi, Mike, and Liz, sponsored by Thermo Fisher Scientific.
Hey, so good to see you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so cool.
Great. Well, let's go.
Okay, welcome to The Plunge. Today we're really excited to have Lisa Eshun-Wilson here from Scripps Research Institute. I'm Mike Cianfrocco from University of Michigan. I'm joined by
Liz Kellogg from Cornell University.
And Mimi Ho from Columbia University.
So Lisa, your PhD work on microtubule binding proteins. Why don't you tell us about your recent paper on microtubules and MAPs?
Yes, absolutely. So I was super interested in how different MAPs decorate and stabilize the microtubule. And I focus on a MAP, a protein called MAP7. And it was able to stabilize microtubules in a novel way. It bound in a completely new place along the microtubule face. And it was so beautiful to see for the first time. It also played a role in regulating other MAPs, including motors like kinesin that walk along the microtubule surface. And so you can imagine a microtubule being like a railroad track, and then a motor being the head caboose. Is that the first one, the caboose? And it will pull different cargo, people in the cargo, all these different tools and coal that you need for the train to work and for it to get from one destination to another. And so in the cell, a kinesin can pull so many different things, sometimes orders of magnitude in size, which is so cool to think about. And there are obstacles in the way of this train, and one of them is MAP7, and it helps to regulate the direction of the train. It can help it go a little faster if it needs to. It can get the train off the tracks if there's an emergency and it needs to stop, and it's so powerful and so versatile. So using Cryo-EM, cryo-electron microscopy, a fancy microscope to take pictures of MAP7, we could resolve the details of how this worked and how it regulated other MAPs and motors. So that was so beautiful to be a part of.
Yeah, I know the field was really excited to see it, and I guess it's always fun to talk about with structural biology when are there sort of key steps, because this was not an easy structural target. And so were there moments or a time when it clicked for you that it was going to be possible and that this was going to be something new to discover?
Yes, that's such a great question, and it means so much, coming from you as an expert in the field as well, just your appreciation for the process, because MAP7 has a microtubule binding domain, so a part that will bind the microtubule, but it is largely intrinsically disordered. And so finding the right buffer conditions and really parallel experiments that would all complement each other to tell the same story was really the most important part. So understanding that I had to work really closely with the wonderful single molecule biophysicist, Luke Farrow, to really tell the story and show that multiple MAPs could bind at the same time. So once we got MAP7 binding in the presence of tau, this was really the clicking point, that this is real. It's binding in a different place, and it's occupying a new place on the microtubule lattice. And it's doing something. It's doing something unique. So that was definitely like my aha moment when I saw it with tau, and it really motivated me to continue the project as well, because when you have really challenging projects and you're not seeing anything for some time, you can be like, oh, I don't know if this will ever work. I don't know if it's worth it. But then you get the right experiment or the right result, and you're like, oh yeah, the last 10 years of pain were so worth it. I'm so happy now. So that was definitely my moment. I just felt like it was something also that I had thought of very originally and come up with, and my advisor, Eva Nogales, was like, yes, do it. You've published already your first story, and so now towards the end of your PhD, you can do something very original for yourself. You can have your artiste moment where you go home and you're staring at the canvas and you're like, does this make sense? And one day you're like, yes, it does, and the other you're like, I'm an idiot. So it was a really nice opportunity to get very confident as a scientist too. It's interesting because you kind of have to go through your own journey of ups and downs to realize that the process, it's your process, it's your own. And you are going to make it. It's going to be a process.
Lisa, do you have any like advice for trainees who are experiencing doubt in their own projects? Do you have any tips for dealing with that?
Absolutely. Can I tell you one exhibit that I saw as a graduate student that inspired this tip that I'm going to share with you? Okay, so I went to the MoMA in New York. I really love art museums. And there was one exhibit that was 3 floors tall, like and extensive, and it was called The Process. And so you walk into this dark room, okay, it's dark, there's like trash hanging from the ceiling, things are ripped, there's like all these different routes you can take, and there would be one side of the wall that like had scribbles, but then as you're walking, there's more organization as things are coming, and then you ultimately reach this very organized space. So my piece of advice is persistence and doing something that allows you to stay confident while you're pursuing this very often difficult path. Because for me as a viewer, I'm walking through someone else's process. I can confidently walk through because I know there's a beginning and an end point. I literally can see that. But when you're going through the process yourself, it can feel like that physical space where you're like, I don't know what's going to be next. You're creating it, and it's evolving. So there was an article I read from Jennifer Doudna in Cosmo, I remember, and she paints. And so she said that was really huge for her because CRISPR, in the beginning, we were talking about this was weird. We were like, what is going on? This is weird. And now it's revolutionized the way we do science. And she said she would paint. When things didn't go well or she didn't get the grant she wanted, she would paint. And I was so inspired by this. I was like, I love that because you're going to have your process. It's going to be intense. It's going to be extensive. But you don't want to give up on your process. It's going to go from A to B, where you want to go. And that, like getting that confidence, understanding your process, understanding that you're going to be able to make it through can be really tough if it's your first time. Because like that dark room, it looks really sketch and it's very scary. But once you go through it, once you publish that first paper, you're like, oh, I can do this. Yeah. I want to do bigger things. I want to take on bigger challenges, bigger, crazier questions like Math 7, where no one believes you in the beginning, but they're like, well, you've already met your graduation requirements, go on, girl.
So just to summarize, though, right? Yeah. So I would say probably take it one step at a time, right? Mm-hmm. Tackle easier challenges before you tackle the really hard challenges. And persistence. Is that right?
Yes, I think that's a really good reiteration. What I would add to that is, so something that Eva Nogales, my mentor, did very well is you can do projects in parallel as well. So sometimes you have a easier project, quote unquote easier project, or you're assisting someone in addition to your more challenging independent project. So that can keep your confidence going, which I think is really nice, while you do something that is very avant-garde. So that would be my advice, is have multiple streams of projects. I think the saying is have multiple irons in the fire. Mm-hmm. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. With projects, sometimes you maybe want to give a project your all, you're really excited and you really want to focus on it, but carving just maybe 10% of your time and putting that into another project that's a bit more straightforward, or there are more partners on that project just to keep you going, so you have output also coming out, or output for your work as things are evolving in your career. It will really do you wonders. It'll help you persist and feel like you can keep going.
I absolutely agree with that. I think that having, multiple projects, and especially if they're a little bit different, I feel like that really helps, because then, when you get stuck in a headspace, you kind of get stuck in this loop of like just thinking about this one project. It's nice to be able to step away to something different, like refresh, and then you come back with new eyes and you're like, oh, actually, I see this new thing that I didn't see before because I was just like stuck in it, right? I think you did that very well in your own work, right? In your own training.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah,
I had like a fun side project on the side that I just thought of as like I'm just gonna see what happens, and then I had like my main project that I had like these blinders on, and in the end, it's funny, I think that my PhD supervisor Hong was more excited about my side project than my main project.
It's really turning into its own thing.
Yeah. So
you never know.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess I think me and then also Mike actually, we both, when we started our PhDs in cryo-electron microscopy, we didn't have any prior microscopy experience. I didn't even know how to Linux. I didn't know how to do, like, move from one folder to another in Linux. And so, was that the same for you?
Yes, absolutely. I had very limited lab experience. So I was coming in fresh-eyed, young puppy, just very new.
Yeah. So do you have, I guess, I think a question that I get asked a lot by trainees who are interested in entering Cryo-EM but don't have previous experience. And the number one question I get asked is, I don't know how to do any of this. Is that okay? Right? And so do you have any advice, I think, for trainees coming in who are really interested in Cryo-EM, think it's really interesting, but they don't have, that either background in either area?
Yes, absolutely. So I would have 3 sources or pieces of advice. My first advice would be to find a good mentor, because you're really going to need a partner in this journey. It's going to be a journey. You're going to learn a lot of new things, and you really want a good partner on this like ride, as you're moving forward. And then my second piece of advice would be to be really patient with yourself. Be forgiving towards yourself. Have like self-love, practice self-love with yourself, because you're going to make mistakes. And I know for some trainees that I saw, like certain peers would come in really having done everything a certain way and always getting a result that they saw and wanted, and then made a U-turn and were a novice again, and found themselves getting really frustrated at how little progress they were making. But you're starting from scratch. There's no foundation. You have to kind of pause and work on building that foundation. So you really want to be forgiving towards yourself as you're moving forward. And then my third piece of advice would be to let the biology drive you. So I came in really excited about microtubules. So I had looked at intracellular trafficking, and specifically had studied clathrin-independent endocytosis. So at the NIH, did a post-bac there. Here I am as a postdoc, and I did my mini post-bac. But that experience was really, really wonderful, because it was my first real introduction to a lab and working full-time. And so I loved the biology. I loved the idea of just new pathways in the cell that different proteins could take. And the role that microtubules or proteases or all these additional factors could play in regulating their traffic. So literally like men on the airplane runway with the orange lights, how they're directing the planes. Like, I loved studying those agents in the cell because I think they have a lot of agency in disease, like saying when to switch things. Oh, we need to adapt to a new environment. So there was a lot of versatility, flexibility, and excitement at those turning points in the cell. Yeah. And so wanting to look at maps was really motivating to learn the new technique, because every time we saw a microtubule, by electron microscopy, which is really straightforward to see, it's so huge, it lays across holes on the grid. But every time it felt so good. So you're like, ooh, I want to see that again. Come on. It just like motivates you. Like, so you go to your mentor again. Can you just show me again how to prepare grids maybe manually instead of using the Vitrobot, because maybe that'll help me see my beautiful microtubules better. So that was something my previous mentor, Julie Donaldson, she used to tell me, said, treat your cells like your babies. Like they're people with these stories behind them. What's their story? What do you want to learn about them? How are you going to push their story forward? Maybe the field already has some understandings of or knowledge of how they're working, but maybe there's a twist or there's an additional part of the story that's missing, and you can be a part of discovering that. Do you want to discover it? And she'd get me really hyped. Do you want to do it? I'd be like, yeah. And she'd be like, then you need to learn this. And I'll be like, oh, yeah. Will do.
That's a great attitude. Yeah, it's a great attitude.
So that was very motivating, like wanting to answer the question and not letting the tool kind of deter you. Like, oh, I don't know this, but it's a question I want to answer and it requires this tool. So I'm going to put effort into learning this tool so I can answer this question. Because at the end of the day, my goal is to get the answer, no matter what. no matter what tool I have to learn.
Perfect. Yeah, no, that's a really good answer. Actually, you know, we had this kind of like little fun question that we didn't put in here, but I want to like see, you know, what, now that, you know, you're a trainee, you're still getting your hands like really deep into the microscopy, right? So what is your most favorite part of Cryo-EM? What's your favorite Cryo-EM habit?
Oh, that's a great question. I really love manual plunging. I know this is really weird, but we have a humidity controlled cold room that we can set up at Scripps that Gabe has very nicely set up, and the equipment is less than $2,000 that he's built. Like, it looks like a tool you'd have in a garage, and I just love that I go in there with my huge jacket and I'm like, oh, it's so cold in here. But I think I love, like, all the tools just look so raw. Like, all the tools look like you just have so much control over every step. When you blot, how you blot, you see the liquid go onto the blotting paper. Like, you're really into every single part. You're so present with every single part. And you're freezing, so you want it to go well and go fast. But it just makes you feel so present with the blotting process that it's almost meditative. It's really interesting, but I really love manual plunging. Like, that's something I want to do for the rest of my carear, is always set that up.
I actually feel the same way.
Oh, that's so funny.
What, you do manual plunging? No, not about manual plunging, but about like freezing grids.
Like, what?
This is news to me. No. So I feel that way about like freezing grids and clipping grids. I feel like, okay.
Yeah.
So I had the head of my graduate program at UCLA. I remember I went to a meeting with her and she was like, oh, you're like a little bit early and there's this thing I have to do for half an hour, but you can come with me. And so I went with her, and so she was doing aortic dissections on mice, and she was like, so I'm super busy these days because I run the graduate program, but I want to keep like in touch with the lab. And so one thing that I do is that, you know, I picked one thing that is very, very self-contained that I can do in half an hour. And I don't have to do the prep, I can't, you know, I don't have to keep track of it. I can just go in and do it. And she's like, so I'm still the best set of hands in the lab for doing aortic dissections. And so she's like, my students just set everything up. They cut open the mouse and everything. And then I just go in and like do them really quick and then leave. And so I was like, that's an amazing idea. And so I want to have that for me as well. And so I decided, like, the thing for my lab is I'm always gonna be like, I want to always be the one who's in there, like, either like freezing grids or like clipping grids. I also really like clipping grids.
Yeah, right? The thing is cool.
Yeah, it's fun.
The
And so, like,
apparatus is fun.
No, exactly. And so like I was just like, you know, that's gonna be my one thing that I'm always gonna be able to do, because there's no setup, you can just go in, do it, it's half an hour and you're out, right? So
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head of what I'm trying to get across to, is that it's fun.
yeah.
So the favorite parts of my day are the parts that make me feel like a little kid, like in school, learning something new or doing something that just makes me feel so present in what I'm doing. And I just want to add a second thing, actually, and that's resolving heterogeneity in really flexible maps. So during COVID, because I started right after the lockdown, so I was at home for the first month with only challenging data sets that Gabe had available. And they were challenging because they were so heterogeneous. So I was thinking of ways to resolve the heterogeneity in these different parts, and was excited by this tool, 3D variability analysis, that came out and let me really play around with that. And it came out that summer. Like, they had the YouTube video June 2020, so it was like perfect to get introduced to this tool and to use it to resolve flexible proteins. So I really love seeing that, watching the proteins dance and trying to make sense of the choreography. I really enjoy this.
Okay, so you've told us a lot about some of your really fascinating work, as well as you had some really great advice for people who are interested in coming into the field. I really resonated with what you were saying. But now we want to hear about what the future holds for Lisa. So can you tell us, what are you excited about in terms of, the next steps for you, as well as what you see as the future of the Cryo-EM field?
Yeah, this is such a great question, and I think being here at the American Crystallography Association meeting, as well as attending the Gordon Research Conference in 3D-EM this summer, these conferences have really, for me, solidified my desire to integrate AI with Cryo-EM and with Cryo-ET, and to really set up a pipeline to screen and answer questions, because all three of these techniques really inform each other. And so my PIs, Gabe Lander and now Andrew Ward, are being very supportive of me exploring this possibility and using viruses and antibodies, which we have a lot of great tools and knowledge of, to benchmark key parts of this pipeline and deepen my understanding of how to integrate AI and how to keep myself abreast of the best tools and really at the cutting edge level. And Cryo-ET, you know, seeing the Arctis release at Thermo Fisher yesterday at M&M was so inspiring. I was like at the front clapping my hands like a little kid, because I was like, they're getting, you know, 3.2, 3.3 angstrom resolution now with Cryo-ET. Granted, it's mainly ribosomes, but you know, I was like, but there's hope, like there's excitement. Like I remember microtubules being a great tool to show that EM is promising, has an auspicious future. So I'd love to be part of this like gold rush now with Cryo-ET and using AI and even MD to inform targets and selections for my specific biological niche, which I'm excited to move forward with as well. So I love this question because I think it's really important for future trainees too, coming into Cryo-EM, to think very forward and think into the future, just like you're asking me to do, because I think if I was starting Cryo-EM today, it would be very important to integrate Cryo-ET training immediately. Yeah, and like I love that your lab is doing both.
Yeah.
You know, that's very awesome. It's like ideal. Like I would direct my trainee to your lab. You know what I mean? I'm like, go and learn both right now, okay? because you know, I did EM as a PhD student, and now I'm doing EM as a postdoc. And so I know for me, some people, I was talking about this with Charles Rice actually recently, who's really wonderful hepatitis C pioneer, and he was saying that he did his PhD and his postdoc both at Caltech, and he had the kiss of death. And I was like, I have a similar kiss of death because I've essentially stayed in only EM. And so here I am now at the next stage of my career and actively integrating Cryo-ET and AI, because these are really like the frontiers, which is very, very exciting. I mean, Cryo-ET may catch up to Cryo-EM in my lifetime. It's very possible. So I want to get on that successful train. Gonna get a ticket. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been like amazing. You were really, really great. So thank you for making time for us.
Thank you, my absolute pleasure. Thank you again for thinking of me for this wonderful opportunity.
Thanks for listening to The Plunge, a Cryo-EM podcast from Mimi, Mike, and Liz, sponsored by Thermo Fisher Scientific.